This is a revision video covering the urinary system and going into the formation of urine. It's geared towards the Irish Leaving Cert biology course. So let's go into the urinary system. It's made up of two kidneys and they're located in the small of your back, and leading on from two kidneys are these two tubes connecting the kidneys to the bladder. These are the urethers. The bladder is this muscular bag that basically just stores urine, and then you have the urethra, and it's through this little tube that urine is expelled from the body. So at this stage, it's very important that you can label the urinary system and know the kidneys and that they are located in the small of your back in the abdominal cavity. It's very important that you can label the blood vessels that are directly linking into the kidneys. So for example, you have the aorta, and the branch of the aorta known as the renal artery brings blood rich in waste into the kidneys, into both kidneys, and then you have the renal vein linking directly into the vena cava, bringing filtered or blood lacking in waste out of the kidneys. Central to the urinary system are the two kidneys, and their role is to filter the blood. This is how the waste is removed from your blood, through filtration. And it's said that your blood plasma is actually filtered approximately 60 times per day. Kidneys filter the blood, and this filtration removes the waste. The waste that is removed is known as urine, and to discuss urine formation, you really need to know the internal structure of the kidney, and for this there are three important labels needed. The first label is the cortex. This is the outer edges of the kidney, and I always think of cortex equals corner, and that's how I remember it. After the cortex is the middle of the kidney, known as the medulla, sometimes referred to as the medullary pyramids. Just think of M for the middle. So the final label is the renal pelvis, and if you examine the kidney there, you can see the tube leading to the bladder, the ureter or the ureter. The kidneys are amazing at filtering the blood. However, they would not be able to do so without this special functional unit known as the nephron, and you have 1 million of these nephrons approximately in each kidney. You must be able to draw and label the nephron, and each of these labels are so important. If you don't know them, well then you won't be able to discuss urine formation in the detail that's required for your exam. So this is really important and you really need to know it very well. So let's begin with the very basic structure, not talking about the blood supply, just the very basic structure of the nephron. Well, at the start, at the very top, you have Bowman's capsule. Then you have the proximal convoluted or twisty tubule. Then you have the loop of Henle, and it has a limb going down. You go around, and then you've got the ascending limb, the going up limb of the loop of Henle. Then you meet the distal convoluted tubule. Think of far in the distance at its twisty, and this leads into the collecting duct. So now let's consider the blood supply in each one of those nephrons, and remember we think that there's about 1 million of these in each kidney. So sitting in Bowman's capsule is the glomerulus. It's a ball of capillaries, the walls of which are only 1 cell thick, so very thin walled, and this facilitates filtration. The glomerulus is just one part of the jigsaw. You have to understand the total blood flow into and out of the nephron. So firstly, blood enters the kidney via the renal artery, and that's branched directly off the aorta. So when it reaches each nephron, that renal artery has narrowed into arterioles, the most important of which is known as the afferent arteriole. This then narrows further into the glomerulus, and then the glomerulus will lead into the efferent, think of E for exit, arteriole, and that is wrapping around each of the nephrons, and it's there that material re-enters the blood supply. The efferent arteriole will eventually link in with other venules that form branches of the renal vein, and blood flows out of the kidney in the renal vein, and it's filtered, it contains no waste. So now you know the structure of the kidney, you can label the nephron, and you know the blood flow into and out of the nephron. It's time to discuss urine formation, and there are 3 stages: filtration, reabsorption, and finally secretion. So stage 1 is filtration. It takes place in the glomerulus, and that sits in Bowman's capsule. Now, the reason why it's actually referred to as ultrafiltration is because the blood vessels, remember they're branching off the renal artery, are continually narrowing into these arterioles, which narrow into the afferent arteriole and then narrow into that even thinner glomerulus, which is very porous. So the blood pressure is being further increased, and this facilitates ultrafiltration. So now you can see why the glomerulus is sometimes referred to or thought of as a sieve. The blood flow in the glomerulus is very high pressure, and the walls are very thin walled and porous, so a lot of material from the blood is forced out of the glomerulus, it's filtered out. So what exactly gets removed or filtered from the blood plasma? Water, salt, glucose, amino acids, urea and vitamins are just some of the substances that are forced out of the blood plasma through the walls of the glomerulus. Now, the big thing about this is that the body does not intend to get rid of all of these substances, and so they need to be reabsorbed, taken back into the bloodstream very quickly. It's also very important to know what does not get filtered, what is simply too large to fit through the walls of the glomerulus. Well, it's the blood cells and those large plasma proteins such as clotting proteins. So filtration was the first stage in forming urine. Where in the nephron did this take place? It took place in the glomerulus that sits in Bowman's capsule of the nephron. But where in the kidney did this process occur? It took place in the cortex of the kidney, and that's why it's really important that you're familiar with where the nephron is positioned in the kidney. Stage 2 in the process of forming urine is reabsorption. Remember, a lot of good material, non-waste material, was also filtered out of the blood plasma, and this now needs to be taken back into the blood, and this is known as reabsorption. Most reabsorption takes place here at the proximal convoluted tubule. So once the glomerular filtrate has passed by the proximal convoluted tubule, we're really only discussing fine-tuning the reabsorption of salt and water. All of the glucose gets reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule by a combination of active transport and diffusion, but mostly active transport. And most of the salt is also reabsorbed here by active transport or diffusion. All of the amino acids are also reabsorbed at this stage, mostly by active transport, but diffusion can play a role too. Most water is also reabsorbed at this stage by osmosis. So once the glomerular filtrate has passed by the proximal convoluted tubule, most reabsorption has taken place. We're simply only talking about water and salt from now on. So as the glomerular filtrate goes into the loop of Henle, water is reabsorbed by means of osmosis, only water on this side of the loop of Henle. As you go around and as the glomerular filtrate enters into the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, only salt is reabsorbed by means of diffusion, not water, only salt. And as the glomerular filtrate passes up into the loop of Henle, the ascending limb, the upper regions of the ascending limb, salt is reabsorbed, but this time it's reabsorbed by means of active transport. The glomerular filtrate now enters the distal convoluted tubule, where water can be reabsorbed by osmosis and salts by diffusion if needed. When the glomerular filtrate enters into the collecting duct, water can also be reabsorbed by osmosis if needed. The walls of the distal convoluted tubule and the walls of the collecting duct can be made more permeable to water, resulting in more water being reabsorbed, all by the action of a hormone known as antidiuretic hormone. This hormone, ADH, is made by the hypothalamus but is sent to the pituitary gland in your brain, where it is secreted when needed. It travels in your blood to the walls of the nephron, particularly the walls of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, making them more permeable, resulting in more water being reabsorbed. And the use of more and more twice in your answer is very important. So that completes reabsorption. That's the second stage in the formation of urine. Remember that it took place in the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct of the nephron. But where in the kidney did it take place? It took place in the cortex and also in the medulla. The final stage in the formation of urine is known as secretion. This is where substances such as ions like potassium ions and hydrogen ions are dumped into the nephron, and this all takes place at the distal convoluted tubule. This is a really important process because the secretion of hydrogen ions is a way of controlling the pH of the blood, and this is homeostasis, maintaining constant internal conditions. It's also important to note that the whole process of forming urine is also a means of osmoregulation, so controlling water content, and this too is part of homeostasis. So the kidneys are not only organs of excretion involved in the removal of metabolic waste, but they're also involved in homeostasis too. So what eventually passes out through the collecting duct is urine. It's mostly made up of water, salts and urea. So that was the urinary system. Remember, the only way to do well is to do past papers and to check the answers with the marking scheme. That's essential. These videos never replace using your textbook or listening to your teacher. They're not made for monetary gain or intended for commercial use, and any of the icons used are all from the Noun project. I'm a pro member, but I want to credit the artists.